Hello, welcome to the Headlamp Report. I'm your host, Mark Singer. I want to examine how SpaceX's development of Starship and the Super Heavy booster will impact the goals of sending a cargo mission to Mars in 2024 and a manned mission in 2026. Since I don't have visibility of SpaceX's actual plan, I've created one of my own. And in this, the first of what I hope will be a series of videos, I'm going to share with you my approach, critical milestones, timelines, risks, assumptions and unknowns. I'll also be asking what I think is the big question and one that no one appears to be asking. My background is risk management, compliance and finance. Although I'm not a professional project manager, I have managed many projects over the years. If you stick with me through to the end, I'll explain why I have a Tupperware of pasta on my desk. Let me say from the outset that this is a first for me. I've never done anything like this before, so please forgive the old school style using slides and the low production values. So, can SpaceX get to Mars? Let's find out. Here are some of the main terms and common abbreviations that I've used in these slides. I have assumed a certain level of familiarity with SpaceX's Starship program and indeed NASA's Artemis program. If you would like a more basic entry-level introduction to the Starship and the goings-on in Boca Chica, I highly recommend Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut, and I'll leave a link to his channel. Let me also say that this is quite a long video at around 25 minutes as at the latest cut. I anticipate that future videos will be significantly shorter, as these will deal with updates to the plan that arise as testing proceeds. As I'm based in the UK, I've generally used British English instead of American English, although there are exceptions, and in some cases both versions of the same word may be used. The creation of a self-sustaining colony on Mars, Elon Musk's stated ultimate aim, is dependent on first achieving Mars colonisation capability, and it's this milestone that the Starship development programme is intended to achieve. It's not clear, at least to me, how NASA awarding SpaceX Lunar Gateway or Human Landing System contracts will factor into the Mars project. So these are not included as milestones in this video at the present time. From the start, let me be upfront about my initial tentative view. I think SpaceX currently has a 12.5% or 1 in 8 chance, although trending down right now, of meeting the 2024 launch window to send a cargo mission to Mars. The 1 in 8 figure is just a starting point and may be a bit optimistic. There's no complicated calculations involved, just some very simple assumptions, guesses and steps, and I'll introduce these shortly. What follows are the milestones, sub-milestones, risks and challenges. Given the complexity of SpaceX's Starship project, I've simply specified 3 critical milestones prior to being cargo mission ready. So they are low Earth orbit capability, in-orbit refilling capability, cargo mission capability, and there are other capability milestones for crew mission readiness. Now, each of those critical milestones depend on the earlier ones for success, and each of these can be further subdivided into technical sub-milestones, some of which we know about at the moment, others we may not, and they will be added as and when they appear to lie on the critical path. Many milestones that SpaceX will be working towards are otherwise considered not to lie on the critical path. I've arrived at critical capability milestone dates simply by starting at the 2024 launch window, which opens on 26th of September, and working backwards and attributing due dates to each of those 3 milestones. Simply, it's a guess, an educated guess, I hope, but a guess nevertheless. I've attributed to each a 50-50 chance of success of achieving the capabilities by those dates, and when rolled up one after the other, then that's where the 12.5% or 1 in 8 chance comes from. Now, Elon Musk recently told Joe Rogan in an interview that he thought Starship would get to orbit by 31st of December 2021. Now, if that's correct, then there is plenty of contingency built into this plan. I think achieving the low Earth orbit capability is actually the most difficult of these 3, and therefore I'm going to stick with my date for the time being and hope that Elon is right. Each of the critical milestones has a pathway by which each of those objectives will be achieved and a set of significant risks. For low Earth orbit capability, that will be achieved through regular launches of prototype vehicles. For in-orbit refilling capability, the detail of that perhaps isn't well understood at this time, but certainly it must finally be approved through tests in orbit. And the Mars cargo mission capability, again, we don't understand all the detail there yet, but certainly there must be some rehearsal launches and missions. Therefore, that's dependent on the ones that come before. In terms of significant risks, there is a general risk to all those milestones that achievement of the sub-milestones doesn't proceed quickly enough, but also there are specific risks here. The first, and I think the most important one that perhaps is not given enough importance at the moment, is the regulatory one, and we'll talk more about that in later slides. Then, of course, for the in-orbit and cargo mission capabilities, we actually need tanker Starship versions and cargo Starship versions to carry out those tests. Finally, Mars cargo mission capability also needs to develop the actual cargo specification, because it will be no good having a Starship cargo version that you could send to Mars unless you have the right level of cargo that you can send. So that's the in situ resource utilization, equipment, perhaps supplies for a future crew, and that will all have to be specified and put together before a Mars cargo mission can launch. Let's take a deeper dive into the 2 most significant challenges to achieving the first critical milestone, low Earth orbit capability. The technical challenge of maintaining or improving SpaceX's pace of development, and the regulatory challenge, which I've broken down into 3 separate subcategories: license management, launch safety approval, and finally SpaceX's relationship with the FAA. To meet any of the future critical technical milestones, SpaceX needs to demonstrate that the Starship flip landing maneuver works and works reliably. Think about this for a moment. The current factor of reliability is, well, less than 1. Once SpaceX achieves 1, then the project can move forward, but if it remains 1, then progress will be slow because Raptors will be swapped out after every test flight. So the big question, and the one no one seems to be asking, is how many consecutive flights can a Starship carry out on the same set of Raptors? I've estimated the requirements for Raptor engines in terms of engine lights and relights based on a round trip to Mars. This suggests that a Starship needs to be able to perform at least 2 consecutive Earth-based test flights from launch to landing using its sea-level Raptors without any real maintenance after the first flight. To avoid confusion, I'm considering the reliability of sea-level Raptors as part of the low Earth orbit capability milestone, and the reliability of vacuum Raptors as part of the Mars cargo mission capability milestone. I'm not sure that 2 consecutive flights is really what SpaceX will be aiming for. I would have thought a minimum would be 3. But how many flights do you have to do to be able to say that a 3-flight consecutive cadence for engines has been proved reliable? Well, I think it might be at least 9. So think about it like this. A Starship does 3 test flights consecutively without any adverse impacts on the same set of engines. Then with another Starship with a different set of engines, or the same Starship with a new set of engines, then does 3 more. So you've now got a sequence of 3 twice. Is that really reliable? I think you probably have to do another one. So that brings you up to 9. Now what happens if you have an adverse landing event or a RUD in any one of those 9? Effectively you have to start again. So I think what SpaceX has to do is just do lots and lots of flights and push the envelope with consecutive flights to see where they get to. So getting to the point where SpaceX have established reliable Raptor performance over 2, 3 or more consecutive flights is a big challenge, and it's going to take a lot of flights over quite a long period of time. Now I want to turn to some of the regulatory challenges that SpaceX faces. The first thing to note is that SpaceX have an existing relationship with the Federal Aviation Administration regulators that goes back many years, presumably to around 2002 when the company was formed. But now launch and re-entry licensing rules are changing. New rules come into operation in March of this year. They are designed to make it faster and easier to launch space missions, but Part 450, as it is called, runs to 785 pages of detailed rules with hundreds more pages of guidance. It will take a long time to understand what Part 450 means for SpaceX and other spaceflight companies, and whether in fact licensing will be any easier under the new rules, and whether they will support SpaceX's rapid innovation. The current vehicle operator license only covers Starship operations from Boca Chica. It's only for suborbital flights and is for just 2 years, ending May 2022. For any test flights outside of these parameters, SpaceX will have to obtain license modifications. SpaceX is working with the FAA to prepare the way for license applications for suborbital and orbital launches of Starship powered by the Super Heavy booster, but this is a big and complicated task. SpaceX's current Boca Chica launch license notwithstanding, the FAA has to approve each launch from a safety perspective. Any adverse event, such as a landing failure, will give rise to an investigation, and this should not come as a surprise to anyone. The FAA's job is to ensure the safety of the public and of property within acceptable risk tolerances. It's not their job to enable SpaceX's rapid pace of development. Obviously, it's far simpler and quicker for them to approve an upcoming test flight if there are no investigations needed from a previous flight. I don't have experience in aerospace regulation, but I would offer a rule of thumb. a minimum of 5 weeks between Starship test flights anytime there is a rapid unscheduled disassembly, as set out here. The more successful Starship test flights there are, the less of a compliance burden is placed on SpaceX, and the easier it is for the FAA to have confidence in SpaceX procedures and thus approve new launches. Finally, I want to think about the relationship between SpaceX and the FAA. One thing is certain, they will be seeing a lot of each other over the next few years. The very last thing that SpaceX needs in terms of pushing on with its innovation is an adversarial relationship with the FAA, and there are worrying signs that this is exactly what is developing. First, we had the mystery of the SN8 safety violation. Following that, and in the build-up to SN9, we had Elon Musk's snippy tweet. And then, before the launch of SN9, we had the rollout of SN10. Now, when I saw SN10 being rolled out prior to the launch of SN9, my immediate thought that this was a challenge. Something like a space industry hacker, or perhaps the biggest two-fingered salute on Earth. Anyway, whatever, rolling it out even without Raptors or propellant was an unnecessary risk. Now, if I'm the FAA, I can say to SpaceX, I'm not going to approve any launches while there are 2 Starships on the launch pads. So I think I will predict that it will be a long time before we see 2 Starships on the launch pads at the same time. The relationship between SpaceX and the FAA is something to watch closely. I'm now going to delve into some of the sub-milestones that support the critical path objectives 1, 2 and 3, particularly number 1 here, achieving low Earth orbit. So I've broken this down into 4 sub-milestones, and they are the ground infrastructure, Starship capabilities, Super Heavy booster capabilities, and the stacked booster and Starship. Again, the dates on the right hand side of that table are my guesses based on what we currently know and where we currently are. That gets us to where we want to be by the 31st of December next year. So a couple of the assumptions just to point out. So I have assumed in this first draft that the Super Heavy booster prototypes will use landing legs for their flight tests, and that all these hops and test launches can be satisfied from Boca Chica launch mounts alone. Of course, the catch mechanism for Super Heavy booster that's been in the news recently, I've just called that as an unknown at the moment, by which I mean that I've not tried to incorporate that into the critical path. No doubt that more information will come out about that in the coming months. Those sub-milestones can be divided into further sub-milestones. So here, the ground infrastructure requirements I've broken down into 2 separate sub-milestones related to the suborbital launch pads and the orbital launch mount. Again, the assumption here is that any sea-based launch platforms are not part of the critical path for cargo mission capability and are purely for rapid reusability capability. We will see how these turn out. Similarly, for the Super Heavy booster, 2 further sub-milestones, one for preliminary hop tests and very low level altitude launch and landings by 30th of September this year. Then a more robust demonstration of its capability by 31st of March next year. Finally, for this group of milestones, the Super Heavy booster Starship combination, 2 further sub-milestones. The first one really relates to simply getting Starship into orbit. The second one, again, a somewhat more robust measure with successful booster landings, Starship landings, and hopefully more than one orbit test, so that we are then in a position to do some in-orbit field tests. Critical path milestone number 2, in-orbit refilling. The due date for this is 30th of September 2023, 50-50 chance of making it. So I've only gone to this level of sub-milestone at this point. So the first one is about a tanker prototype, and the second one is the actual mechanics of docking, refilling and undocking. So those are tests which have to be done in orbit. No doubt there will be plenty of orbit tests, atmospheric tests, but the final measure is doing this autonomously, like the Dragon capsule docking with the ISS. It's all done autonomously, hopefully by the 30th of September 2023. Finally, critical path milestone number 3, Mars cargo mission capability and readiness, broken down into 3 main sub-milestones. One of the assumptions is that at least one cargo Starship will include Sabatier process equipment for delivering to Mars. The big unknown here is how many Starships will be needed to be converted to cargo Starships for a Mars cargo mission. Looking ahead to the crew mission capability and readiness, so that needs to be ready by November 2026. So that's broken down into 4 main sub-milestones. So the first one of which is that the cargo mission has successfully deployed on Mars, so that we know that the in situ resource utilisation equipment and supplies have been delivered. Then probably the most difficult part of this one is to have a human rated Starship approved for long duration manned missions. That would need to come with radiation protection systems, life support systems, EVA systems. We'll need crew mission rehearsals, and we'll need to prepare over quite a long period of time to get a crew mission ready. This chart shows how the 3 cargo mission critical capabilities and also the manned mission capability fit together and fit with the launch windows. What this chart doesn't show primarily is the various design phases that will be going into these different capability milestones even before these critical timelines start. Appendix 1, 2 and 3 cover various aspects of licensing considerations. Appendix 1 shows an extract from the SpaceX license, which is currently in place. Appendix 2 just pulls out some bullets relating to the new rules, Part 450, and Appendix 3 pulls out some of the safety and risk criteria that are part of subset C of Part 450, safety requirements. Finally, last appendix, Appendix 5, the Earth, Mars, home and transfer launch windows between 2022 and 2041.
So that's where we are as of today, February the 21st, 2021. I hope you found the video interesting and thought-provoking. Please let me know if you think my timelines and milestones are optimistic or pessimistic and why you think so. And please point out any errors and inaccuracies I've made. And now the Tupperware of pasta. If I ask you to guess the number of pasta spirals in that Tupperware, you'd make a simple mental calculation probably and give me a guess. Mathematically, once I have a certain number of independent guesses, then the best answer is the average of all the guesses. So I reckon between us we ought to be able to come up with a pretty darn good timeline and assessment as to whether the launch windows are achievable. Anyway, give me a like, comment or even subscribe if you think this is the sort of video you'd watch in the future. I'm certainly going to be updating my plan as events unfold in Boca Chica and elsewhere. Something I've learnt while making this video: it's an awful lot harder than it looks. You guys out there who make it all look so easy have my utmost respect. Anyway, that's all for now. See you on Mars.